right, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Milligan Lecture. I'm Destiny Coleman, Director of the Wultamati Center for Economics, Business, and Entrepreneurship. The Wultamati Center enhances teaching, learning, and research beyond the walls of the traditional classroom. Our mission is to enhance academic programs and provide real-world opportunities to create future generations of business and world leaders. The Milligan Leaders in Business Lecture Series has brought many distinguished leaders in business and academia to campus and was created in 1992 through a generous endowment established by Robert L. Milligan, class of 1922, and his wife, Mary. Bill was a longtime OWU trustee and had a distinguished career in the Pure Oil Company, where he became president in 1954 and chairman in 1965 until his retirement in 1971. I would now like to introduce and welcome Dr. Matt Volrath, Associate Professor of Business Administration, Chair of the Economics and Business Department, and Faculty Director of the Wultamati Center.
Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for being here tonight. We are really excited to welcome Michael Tiedemann, CEO of Alti Tiedemann Global and a 1993 graduate of Ohio Wesleyan. Michael Tiedemann was a founding partner, CEO, and chairman of the Internal Investment Committee at Tiedemann Advisors, as well as CEO at Tiedemann Investment Group, before leading the merger that created Alti. He is committed to serving others, and he established and is chairman of the board for River Fund, a nonprofit organization that provides food, education, and support services to help families in New York City break the cycle of poverty. Michael Tiedemann, thanks so much for being here. We're pleased to welcome you.
There may be some cat calls tonight from some old friends. Hello, everyone. This is really a pleasure to be here. It's an honor to be here. And I will say that today I arrived early. I had to get a very early flight out of New York because I had meetings throughout the day. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to get here on time. So I arrived at around 9, and I walked around the campus. First of all, the campus is much nicer than when I went here. That's a great thing. And it brought me back. I hadn't been here in 28 years. I've been very busy working. I have 4 kids. I've got life kind of carries you away. And it is so nice to be back on campus, to see all the faces, to meet the faculty that are serving you and working with you. So, but also selfishly, to mark a point in my life where I'm actually invited to speak to all of you. I never take stock of what I've done, I'm always sort of moving forward and building. So for me to have this day on campus and then tonight to speak to all of you and to tell you a little bit about the journey that I've been on for the last quarter century. I say that rather than 25 years because it sounds a little longer, but I have had an incredible experience. I was born and raised in New York, but it started really here at Ohio Wesleyan. I have and to this day, some incredible friends. A few of them will show up later and probably catcall me during the Q&A. But we still get together every summer or in the early fall and play terrible golf, have great conversation, cook meals, and it takes us back to the years where we were here and there was a simplicity of life and we made fun of each other mostly, but we sat around and just always entertained ourselves and found little things to do. And then like all of that creativity and that friendship started here and has lasted for 30 years. So I really encourage all of you we had black books back then, now you have iPhones, but like keep in touch with your friends, stay in touch with them, and I promise you, life goes on all kinds of twists and turns. Those friends will anchor you back to a point in your life that were simple and happy, and those friendships are critically important over time. Sorry, that was just a quick personal message to pass on. Let me just do a couple things here. I want to show this. Alti is, what we have built is a firm based to serve ultra high net worth families. And I will get into some of the nuance of that, but essentially these are very families that have generated and created a huge amount of wealth. Sometimes it's the first generation you're dealing with or the second or third. And with that wealth comes great responsibility, complexity, family dynamics, structures. I mean, it really is not everyone is equally complex, but there's a fair amount of complexity, and above all else, there's a need that families feel to get it right, to not screw up their children because they've made too much money, to make sure that as a family they're aligned with values and what the purpose of their capital is. So it means there are a lot of different ways that families can lead their lives and to build their families. But that wealth is an incredible blessing. It's also a burden. And I think sometimes that's forgotten. This market is I was talking to someone at dinner, Cara, who's a marketing agent. I was like, our marketing team is really trying to depict the connectivity of families and the ecosystem that can be created if you create a global business of families. And these are all, if you think of them as in different cities around the world, they're all big fish in their ponds. Sometimes there's a bigger pond than others. Bottom line is they're smart, they have ideas, they have connections, and what we're trying to do as a firm is to really benefit from their ideas, their brilliance, their connections, their industry knowledge, and then bring that into our business and turn around and have it serve all of our families, and obviously their family themselves. But I will get to this, which is really the journey of the building the business. But as we sit here today, this is our business. We are, I'll show you the map. The map's always my favorite part, which is why I have a lot of frequent flyer miles. But we have offices in Hong Kong and Singapore, and those are two critically important Asian markets, very related but different. Hong Kong, think of it as New York. It's gritty. It's where the old money is, where the English is, where it really is like the original finance capital in Asia. It's an incredibly vibrant city. Singapore, you can think of almost in many ways of Miami. It's very real. There's a lot of money moving there. Everything's new. The architecture and infrastructure is beautiful and new. Hong Kong has this incredible topography in the mountains, and it's incredible that the city is built as it is. But they're two vibrant and different important regions for us. And then Europe, you can see it feels like we're in most cities in Zurich, rather in Switzerland. So Zurich, which is the Swiss-German, Geneva, French, and Lugano, Italian. And so money comes into Switzerland for a very long time for security of the system. It used to come for security and privacy. It's no longer a market where there is privacy. That changed. But however, they generally are biased towards one of those three markets for one reason or another. London is really a city that is undergoing some change, but is still considered to be the financial capital of Europe in terms of where a lot of the talent resides. Brexit has damaged that, for sure. And now you're seeing changes in taxation, and a lot of families are actually moving. Wealthy families are exiting London and moving down into places like Milan and to Portugal, Lisbon, where we have an office. And then the states, you can see we are in a huge number of states and in local offices. And really what we're doing and what a reality is of the wealth management industry is you have to be on the ground, and there's an intimacy to our job. We know everything about the families we serve, and they want to know that we're in their community, that we're trusted, but they also want to know that we have global resources. So we try to balance that local, intimate knowledge and societal that they're comfortable with all the privacy that families need, but then have resources that can come from all over the place, specialty resources and talent that really resides anywhere. So this is our scale. These numbers continue to change. As long as they go up, I'll keep my job. But these are some key things: ESG, investment offering, impact investing, investing in alternatives. Very large families want to have conversations and exposure to the best and the brightest of private markets, the best and the brightest, whether that be investing in real estate or healthcare, technology, obviously. And then impact investing is a space that has been around for 20-something years, but it's evolved immensely in the last decade. And what it really is taking technologies that support entrepreneurs that are investing to cure either healthcare deficiencies, lower cost delivery of solutions, climate tech, energy transition, so some very big global issues that are being attacked by these investors trying to find solutions. And families are now actually have the ability to invest in a lot of these, which tie to causes they care greatly about. So there's a lot of activity there. It's still a new and evolving space. There's more and more talent entering it. With talent and capital, it comes capital formation. So you're really beginning to see a tremendous amount of progress there. But starting in the beginning, I was the youngest of 4 kids. By almost 8 years, everyone in the family liked to say that the reason why I was also happy is because I was a total mistake. I was not supposed to be here. And I had the benefit of being raised by an amazing mother and father. My father was very successful and was a very fortunate person in his career to be a founding partner of a Wall Street firm called Donaldson, Lufkin, Jenrette. And he was president throughout much of the 70s. In 1980, he left to start the Tiedemann Investment Group, which was one of the world's first hedge funds. So our family and my father, back when I was 8 or 9 years old, started really one of the first platforms to support money managers who wanted to run stock picking, but do it with hedges and to be sort of protective against market downdrafts. Importantly, and this is an important thing to understand when you're an entrepreneur, my father was born in Cleveland, Ohio in 1926. His father was a horse blanket manufacturer and had a lot of leverage and was trying to build a business. And in 1929, the Great Depression hit. He went bankrupt. He took his life. My father at the time was 3 years old, didn't know that story until he came back to Cleveland in his late 20s on a business trip and was told by a family the story. The point of that is that shaped his view of the importance of optimism and the importance of not giving up, the importance of not letting others give up, because for him, for us, being optimistic is a choice you make. For him, it was a survival mechanism. And I always used to view my own level of optimism relative to his, and only when he passed and I was writing his eulogy did I really understand the depth of survival in his optimism. But what it did is it shaped all these people and all these entrepreneurs and anyone who worked with them, myself included, that hard cycles are nothing but that. They're hard. And what comes out of it is you find out who you're in business with. You find out whether or not you have a good business. You find out which part of your business needs to improve. It forces change, and the change ultimately makes you better. And you really find out about the character of a firm and of the people during those times. In some ways, they're better to go through than good times where everything's easy. No one's really learning because everything's working and everyone feels underpaid and you're dealing with egos, and it's a totally different type of cycle and challenge when you're in management. But he started this business with that view that money managers and talent should be independent and not be part of huge firms. And he also had the view, because of his father's passing, he saw what happened with the legacy types of trust companies. There was a trust set up in 1932 that had a dollar value, and 40 years later, when his mother passed, it was the same dollar value. So from the base of the Great Depression until 1972, through this incredible market cycle, the trust company managed to make no money. And he was, at that time, the president of a very successful Wall Street firm, and said, this is appalling. And everyone he complained to about it had a similar or different version of a similar story or similar frustration. And as he talked to me, we as a family had no trust, and he didn't want to set up any trust, and he didn't want to have an institution involved. And he said, he kept saying, I want to have a modern trust company. I want to have a business that you could invest just with the best in managers, and if they're not doing a good job, you take the money back and no one can walk down the hall and complain to you that this is a real open architecture, conflict-free advice, and have it be part of a trust company. And lucky for all of us, one of our founding partners had worked at JP Morgan and knew the Delaware banking law. And so the state of Delaware, and Wilmington in particular, was really the only place at that time, it's all changed in 25 years, that allowed an open architecture, conflict-free investment as a trust company. It was the only place that allowed you to invest. It was largely due to the fact that the DuPont family wanted to own concentrated stock and wanted to have sort of different rules. So they had pushed for a lot of legislation in the state. So we started in 1999. My father approached me and said, do you want to join? And I was doing very well. I'd lived in Brazil, working for a Brazilian investment bank in my early 20s after graduating from here. I would recommend to any students, if they have a chance to study abroad, if they have a chance to be an expat and live in a market and get a job, do it. Don't hesitate, take the risk. You can always come home. This country will be waiting for you. It is an amazing thing. I had an incredible personal and work experience living in Brazil. I was the only American working for an incredibly successful firm. There was hyperinflation. I mean, this is what I walked into. I landed on the ground in Brazil. There was 35% inflation a month. Imagine that. People would go to the back of the grocery stores because they were changing the price in the front, and it was like 2% per day cheaper in the back of the store. It was chaos. And the currency was all over the place. And then they went through all these reforms. I was there when Brazil won the World Cup, which was like a religious experience to be around. It was really something. So I really highly recommend that if you can do it. As we started the business, my 74-year-old father said, son, what do you think about joining me? I was like, well, what's the business model? And he explained it to me, and I was like, I guess that makes sense. And I kept asking people if they knew about it, and everyone's like, trust company sounds a little sleepy, sounds a little boring. It is, but it's critically important. And we started. I said, the only one I want to do it, I'm uncomfortable with the sort of nepotism. I want to be there from day one. So I left a very lucrative job, which I regretted for like 2 years, I might add. But I left a lucrative job to join my 74-year-old father and two other gentlemen who left from JP Morgan. And about a year in, we've won our first client, but I'll tell you, 11 months in, I was like, I've made a grave mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. I was 29 years old. Those are the things you should do when you do not have children, and you can take risks. And you will fail, and I got lucky. Most people fail, or at least fail once or twice. We're lucky that we live in a country where failure is accepted. People get second, third, and fourth chances, unless they're crooks. Sometimes even there they get second chances. But in other countries like Germany, where I now I'm spending a lot of time doing business, they don't take chances, because if you fail once, you're a failure, and it's like a systemic challenge for that country that stifles entrepreneurs. We live in a country that rewards it, that understands failure. You're brave for trying, so just take chances and go to the office. Surround yourself with people, be mentored, learn from your peers. Just get into an office, be around people, and learn. Do not buy this work from home stuff. Thank you. My HR would tell me to stop talking about that subject. I feel a little strongly, you can tell. As we started and we were building one family at a time, and we sort of hiring, and everyone in the company was doing everything. So we had this kind of amazing teamwork, and we were all working at all hours, and anytime we had a new presentation for a prospective client, like literally we were in the office together until 11 o'clock, and we'd get it, and we'd hopefully win the business, and we were all hanging, we were like living and breathing for like successes and terrified of failures, but we were all in it together, and it was a really exciting time. As we grew from 99 to 2016, we did begin to develop more structure and defined roles, and you sort of, as you went through time, you found who was better at what parts of the business, and people naturally gravitated there, or sometimes you had to direct them there. But nevertheless, we really built the business, and it was mostly East Coast. It was only in the US. And I was approached, this was not my idea, I was approached by someone who's in San Francisco, Dallas, and DC. We were in New York and Delaware and Palm Beach. And the gentleman said, I'd love to have a bi-coastal firm. And we've got these really good advisors in these cities, and you've got a really good business. You've got the trust company. We don't have that. That's appealing to us. And we started talking about the combination, putting it together. And I was raised by someone that had seen Wall Street firms merging and failing over and over again. The world is littered with terrible M&A transactions where businesses try to merge together, and it's typically done by a few people at the top and a couple investment bankers who are giving them advice. And it's very difficult to not destroy cultures and to sort of diminish the positives of a lot of firms when you're putting them together. It's very hard to do well. So I was raised by someone who was like, never do it. My father died in 2016, and I did my first merger that summer, literally months after. It was not intentional, but I remember thinking, like, would he be happy with me? But I think, at this point he would be. As a result of his guidance, we were so paranoid to get it right. We thought through every single part of the integration. We started creating timelines and all these things that you had to really consider to make sure that it worked. And because of that, it did. And what I didn't realize at the time was how unique the fact was that we did an actual private company equity merger in wealth management, and that we did this full integration. Because most places were just buying firms and leaving them alone, and we actually fully integrated and created a stronger firm as a result of that. And that was our dedication to that point, was anything we do that is inorganic, i.e. going out and acquiring something, acquiring a team, acquiring a firm, we were going to integrate in full. The 2018 the impact offering was a firm based in Seattle. And Seattle is where the Russell family came from. And it was their firm. It started out as their family office. And they had a 15-year history at the time of investing in impact. And so they had this incredible network and this incredible staff. They had incredible female leadership, which every financial company needs more of, and we needed at the time more of. So it was very helpful to bring in that talent and also to bring in a seasoned team of investors within impact. So we went from having no ability to execute to having the top firm at the time. That team is still with us all these years later, and we have one of the best investment practices globally in that space. I can say that actually with confidence. In 2019, every time I look at the business, I was always thinking from the outside, what are we not doing well? What is changing, whether that be technology, client needs? And in 2019, I realized, because of one of our families that was investing, that had cross-border marriage, I was seeing how we had to use large banks and their service model and their platform to serve our clients and invest that capital. And it was atrocious. We were treated like the bottom rung client. They charged a fee on top of our fee, and it was just, I was like, this is not, we either can say we won't do business with people cross-border, or we need a better solution. I met an individual who had just left Credit Suisse, and before that JP Morgan. We started discussing this, and we established our presence in Zurich in Switzerland. And then that was around about 2 years later, we were introduced to another firm that had a lot of the offshore non-US jurisdictions. And so that's when we merged the three of us and did this crazy thing, which is a public listing. And so all of this, to this point, is chapter one. Life as a private company, the cycles, the market cycles, the people coming and going. We've had a very stable employee base. It's actually and a great culture. It's one of our hallmarks. But that, in all of its entirety, is chapter one. When you decide to take your business and transition it from private to public, it's sort of like you prepare to go to war, and then you're in the war, and you're in it is a totally different existence. For starters, the board, everyone, and I work for the board. So that's the first dynamic that an entrepreneur that is used to getting decisions and making decisions and driving a company forward, now you're dealing with a board that essentially any big decisions need to be approved, presented properly, there's process. A lot of that is good. All of it takes time, all of it takes training, and you need to make sure that you're doing it properly so that the board arrives at the decision that you're hoping they arrive at. But these are board members who have liability, like legitimate liability for every decision that you make and any committee that they sit on. So they are not there to be your friend and your advisor like a private company. They're there to make sure that the shareholders of the business are represented. Not that management is represented, but the shareholders, the investors in the company are. So it's a dynamic in itself. And then when you're doing it globally, you're dealing with regulators, and it's an incredibly big transition that our business has gone through over the last 20 months. Through that transition, probably the most important capital raise I've ever done was I was able to convince a firm called Allianz, which is a huge global insurance and investment company. They manage $3 trillion. They're an incredibly well-run firm and German, and they are, if you've ever done business with various countries in any kind of deal structures, it's great doing a deal with Germans because they say yes, and then actually the document comes just as you talked about it, and if they say no, you push again, as Americans like to do. They kind of, come on, there's got to be a way we can work this out, and they say no with a reason, and then if you ask again, third time, it's a problem. So you learn the way they operate, and I really loved it, and they're very prescriptive, they're very honest, they're very organized, and we're very lucky to have them as our core and largest investor at this point. I'm going to jump, actually, 2024. So it's interesting when we are evaluating the world of wealth, the wealth management market, and I'm talking about all of it now, at any amount of retail to the segment we serve, is an enormous market. It historically was dominated by the banking system, and the U.S. is really where you began to see independent wealth managers breaking off from banks, and this, like us and others like us. And the U.S. is candidly 15 plus years ahead of Europe. Europe still is bank dominated. There's a lot of complexity in terms of, there's currency, there's domicile, there's regulatory, there's a lot of rules in terms of what you can and can't do. So it's very hard and complicated to build and operate a business in Europe. So the banks still have this stronghold. In Asia, it's even further. In Asia, the banks really dominate, and then they also, there are fee structures that are totally conflicted, but no one seems to care. So we are set up with our open architecture model, and we have one fee that the client pays us. Everything's transparent. The client knows what they're paying us. The banking system charges a fee, and then they invest with managers, and then the managers pay them a fee. So they're getting two fees, and then they're charging for other products. And so the clients don't really have the visibility of what they're paying, and they're much more oriented around high growth, take risk. It's more of a gambling approach, whereas the U.S. is a market, it's a really deep capital market. I mean, every strategy or any type of asset class here, there's so much liquidity in the system. And you realize how much deeper it is when you leave and you go outside and you see the size of credit markets or equity, or the depth of equity markets outside of the U.S. versus here. So it's much more of a gambling mentality. Like, I'm going to try that. I want to get 35, 40% returns, whereas we're investing for longer terms, longer periods of time, and we're trying to compound these assets. So it's very interesting. The competitive landscape is different. The families still share a lot of the same dynamics. So when you're dealing with a wealthy family, that is in business transition from one generation to the next, they're having, whether they're in Indonesia, in France, or in California, they're having very similar conversations. They're struggling with very similar things. And when we get our families together, we have offsites, which is really amazing because that's when you sort of pinch yourself that you actually have a global business and you have these families fly in. We had one this past September in Lisbon, and we had people, incredible families from 11 different countries and something like 18 cities, and they had more fun getting to know each other because it started out and everyone's a little reserved, and then you do various meals and open talks and you get engagement, and you start to see all of the shoulders drop and all the openness begin because people start to realize these are my peers. They too are struggling with the same issues or the same decisions about, that they're trying to sort out. And so for us to be in a position to serve them and to help them through those processes and obviously steward investment decisions, structuring decisions, all of these things that you make a decision today that has a pronounced effect on the next generations 20, 30 years later. So that is the principle that I want to talk about today. I do want to make sure that I leave time for questions. But the industry at large is in an interesting phase, and I don't want to get into too much technical, but there was a fragmentation of firms leaving the big banks, and there's been some great growth, and now there's a consolidation. So the fragmentation created hundreds and hundreds of independent advisors, and now private equity firms and capital sources are going and buying, and firms like us, candidly, are going and acquiring these firms and really beginning to consolidate a lot of that talent and the asset pool. So the industry is going to do the same thing in Europe. It'll do the same thing in Asia, and we obviously will be in the mix for a lot of these conversations. But the industry itself continues to be a great place. It's a growing space. It's a place that needs young talent. It needs talent that are good at tasks in their jobs, but also good at engaging, good at working with people. It is the ultimate human capital business, supported by systems. But ultimately, you are dealing with human issues all day long and human dynamics all day long. So I studied psychology when I was here. It's actually been very helpful, which you wouldn't expect for someone in finance, but it actually has been very helpful because I'm dealing with people at all levels of my business and families. And these are skills that transfer. But as the industry continues to evolve, there will be new dynamics within it, but the infusion of talent will be needed throughout. So when I think about an industry to consider going into as a graduate, this is definitely one that you should consider. And then there are differences in how the different firms serve families and how they're structured. There are the huge banks that have great offerings, but they're for more sort of a retail orientation. And then there are a lot of independent firms where you can get into a smaller firm and get exposure to a wide number of issues that families are dealing with or investment topics that people are evaluating. So it's a very dynamic industry. It's always changing. One of the things that I think is interesting about it in particular is it's got one label, it's finance or wealth management, but you're looking at everything, every industry, all investment trends, different types of investment managers, different ways of investing, serving, estate planning, tax structures. I mean, it's constantly changing, so it's never boring. You're always learning, and if you're in a firm that's dynamic, it's a really great career. And you're not working 80-hour weeks. You actually have a balanced life. It should be boring by definition. It shouldn't be that volatile in terms of how you're compensated. So it's really, I think it's a terrific industry. I feel so blessed to have been in it all these years, and it's been my job to sort of drive strategy and continue to push forward, as hopefully my father would have wanted me to. But that's it. I'll stop there. And I don't know if there are any questions, and I'm happy to answer anything that I went through too quickly or anything that you might be of interest. I see a hand.
Oh, thank you.
Oh,
First of all, thank you for doing this. Wonderful job. Appreciate it, Michael.
thank you, John.
What advice do you have for everybody here is an entrepreneurial, taking their experiences that they're having now in college, and what should they do with that over the next couple of years as they enter various businesses, not just finance?
At the end of the question, John? Sorry.
Back to your psychology degrry, what advice do you have for everybody who wants to
honestly-
pursue an entrepreneurial endeavor?
I honestly think getting that first step, I can remember thinking, looking out and just honestly it's very overwhelming. You're sitting here in Delaware, there's this huge world, there's all these different careers, you're applying, you don't feel connected to anything. It's very hard to be welcomed into your first job. And I think the most important first step is the first step. And no one I've ever met has made the first step that ended up to be the perfect career ending, that their resting spot. So the first step is getting in. You're learning, you're meeting people, you're learning from peers, you're seeing people that have different skill sets than you. It's a great opportunity to just get in and learn and soak things up and be around people and be around the energy of an office and see if you like it and see if you like the people and see if you find a mentor. Try to find a mentor, ask questions, and listen. And just, honestly, but take that first step. And don't worry about it being the perfect, there is no perfect first step. I mean, I really don't know a single person who got that first job that led to their end point. So don't be afraid of it being imperfect and making a change in a year. That's honestly my best advice, John. Thanks for asking the question. No more questions from back row. Oh, it's just like an inside job. Yeah, there's a microphone if you're.
Oh, I don't need a mic.
No,
all right. I don't know how my voice is going to work. But, Mike, after you finished over here at Ohio Wesleyan, you ended up going to Chile?
I did.
All right. People were sitting in a room with people who are, I imagine, working on getting good grades and working on their resume. Would you have hired yourself at the age of 23, 24 with your background and your life in Chile?
No. Definitely not. No, short answer is no, which is why I got a job in Brazil. But I had a Latin American connection, and I ultimately said I didn't care what you pay me. And they hit that bid. They paid me $16,000 a year. And then the currency actually got stronger against the dollar, so I was making like $12,000 a year, which in a city like Sao Paulo, which is like New York, LA, it was not a lot of money, but it was absolutely the right decision. But the only reason why, honestly, I think I got the job is they said, you want to come down here? I said, I want to learn the language, I want to learn the culture, I want to learn the markets. I want to be here, I want to work. And they were like, who's this American kid? Why does? And they took a chance on me. It was a risk-free chance. I was given 2 months, and if Lula actually the current president again, the only place that is the political landscape like the U.S. is Brazil, where Lula is the leftist who somehow managed to avoid corruption charges, and just like our potential ex-president. And so we have if he had won that election, I was given 2 months and I was going to be sent home, and I was like, I don't care, I'll take the risk. I get 2 months of a job down in Brazil, I was going to try to learn it, and I was the only American, I said this earlier, I was the only American in the bank. I learned Portuguese quite quickly because everyone was so kind as I was trying to learn. They said, you're doing great, unlike the French, which are like, why don't we just speak in English? The Brazilians are like, they love Americans, and they were so friendly, and I sit at dinners. I was always like the fifth or seventh or ninth wheel at these dinners, and I just listened to couples and joking, and I just started learning. All of that was part of the experience of living abroad and taking a 2-month job. And so I got lucky. I mean, and that's what happens when you take a risk sometimes. It doesn't always happen, but unless you put yourself out there, you will not ever get that chance.
Given the current events which are happening in Middle East and China, and now the Goldman Sachs quarter reports, JPM quarter reports, what's your economic outlook right now? What are the potential risks, and what are the opportunities to make money? I know you don't give it for free, but if you can.
So the geopolitical risks are very unusual now on a lot of levels. One, obviously, the Middle East has been complicated. It's not just newly complicated; it's been complicated forever, and it's horrible to see what's happening, and it somehow continues to get worse. So that in itself, and obviously that Russia, Ukraine. So you have these geopolitical forces that are highly complicated, and our election actually will have differing results, I think, depending on who wins. I'm not making a political statement. I'm a political atheist, personally, just to be very clear. But ultimately what you're seeing is the countries, and the reason why the U.S. is winning, or has been winning, why the U.S. stock market continues to do well, is the dynamism of the U.S. corporations, the system in which those corporations operate, the depth of the capital market, the talent that still wants to come and work at firms, and then obviously the capital that rewards success. It becomes self-reinforcing, and the businesses, people rightly criticize the U.S. about many things, of which I'd probably agree with some or most of them, but the U.S. Is the most welcoming country still of people from all around the world, save the political speak that is talked about and certain specific issues. It is a country that takes talent, and ultimately talent drives for opportunities, and that is self-reinforcing. And one of the opportunities remains here in the U.S. I think when you look at policy in Europe versus the U.S., and if you look since the GFC in 2008, the U.S. GDP has almost doubled that of Europe in that time frame, and it's staggering, the difference, and the stagnation and the lack of mobility of work across Europe, the tax structures, the 4-day work weeks and shrinking. I mean, it is you can't fire people, so no one wants to hire people, so the job market's stagnant. I've learned a lot about labor law recently. So when you think about a place to invest and why the U.S. continues to succeed, there are a lot of those dynamics that in our legal system, ultimately our corporate legal system and our legal system, it's a bell-shaped curve. There are mistakes that happen all the time. That's, I think, undeniable. But in the capital markets, there's a bankruptcy law that is tried and tested. There are rules that are tested, and they go through the courts, and they prove themselves out. So that creates more and more confidence. That's an underpinning of a lot of this is our legal system. But the geopolitical risks are not getting better. Societal issues. Look, my business benefits from the wealthiest people. The wealth gap growing is not good. It has been growing since 2008. It's been growing because in 2008, the only people that could borrow and take advantage of zero interest rates were the rich and the corporations. And the rich own the stocks, the rich own the assets, and the corporations own the assets, and that just, and you had 10, 12 years of zero interest rates, and the primary beneficiaries of that were the rich. And so you now have visibility with everyone's iPhones, and people are angry, and people are understandably upset about the disparity of wealth that's been created and the real hardship that many Americans are suffering, and the inflation against their lack of wage inflation. So there are all these things that ultimately shows up in tax policy, shows up in elections, and that's why you get Bernie and Trump. They're not Republicans and Democrats. They are, but they're really protest votes against the system. And then the middle then feels unrepresented. So it's a very interesting time. I think the digitalization of the economy is undeniable. I think it's very hard to say that like the really big winners that have been winning will not continue to keep winning, because they just have so much. You want to talk about AI, it's like Google, there are AI companies, and then all the big tech companies are massively investing in these spaces, and they're not going to be left behind. So it's a lot of what has been continuing to succeed, I think, likely will continue.
Hello. My name is Kara Cannon, current senior at Ohio Wesleyan University, and my question is, what gets you out of bed in the morning? Like, what's that, when you wake up, what's the one thing you think about that makes you go, gee, I can't wait to start the day?
Coffee. I honestly, when I was talking about being in the office and the importance of being in the office, especially as young, someone learning in an industry, there are so many days, and I'm the person who's supposed to be the cheerleader and the leader and the driving force. There's so many days where I'm just like everyone else, dragging in to get in the office, and then I'm around my people, and I'm around the people I work with, and I get that energy transfer, and they throw out an idea, ask a question, and then boom, you're back in it. So I'm drawn to being part of a team and being part of a community of people I really like to be around. And ultimately, I love being, this career has been one that I never would have predicted that I would have been in this business. I love the dynamic nature of it. But being around the people gets me out of bed. Supplanted with coffee.
Hi, I wanted to ask what particularly took you to Brazil instead of any other country, and how did your experience in Brazil shape your approach to global investment strategies?
So it was the country that took me. So my resume wasn't exactly screaming job opportunities. So I was very lucky. I ended up getting hired by really the top Brazilian investment bank. I think what I learned from my experience in Brazil was really, it made me think about, for example, Bitcoin very differently. Having lived in a country that was devaluing, everyone in the US dollar, we're so spoiled. We live in the dollar, it's the trade currency of the world. English is the trade language of the world. You live in a country that has a currency that is devaluing. It's like so value destructive, it's mind-boggling, and it happens very quickly. And the people that have the least room for error are the ones that are hurt the most. It's the people who either can't protect themselves in the banking system or can't get their money offshore. And so an asset like Bitcoin for someone in Argentina or someone in a part of the world like Nigeria, or a place where there's inflation and currency devaluation, Bitcoin is an incredibly important asset. So at times, we look at it in dollar terms, trading at 60,000 or whatever the price it is. I don't look at it very often. I don't own it, otherwise I'd be talking about it a lot more. But it is, when you're living in a country where there's instability, you begin to realize the importance of diversification, starting with currency. You begin to understand about interest rate differentials and obviously illiquidity. illiquidity in a lot of these markets is really the driving force behind a lot of the volatility and a lot of the wins and losses that occur. Where again, in the States, we have these very deep markets where you can buy and sell stocks, and there's a tremendous amount of liquidity in the system that enables you to do that. It's become much more and more tech-driven and algorithmic in nature, but it's still, it's totally disparate situations between emerging markets and U.S. I don't know if I answered your question in full, but I know I talked long enough.
I was wondering how your firm handles the different dynamics between family members or their interests. If you could speak a little bit on that.
Yeah, that's a hard one. And you have to strike the balance. There are two things you don't do with families that are clients. You don't impose a political view, because it's like a third rail. You just don't, if you can stay away from politics when dealing with families, or in general, I think, but certainly with families, you don't want to sort of, but with family dynamics, no one can, even if one person is right, you can't start with, well, clearly they're right and you're wrong, and because the money is emotional, and there are dynamics and things that need to be expressed and heard, and there needs to be empathy about whatever issue it is that is being discussed. So we have people who are specialists in this, and they are incredibly engaging and empathetic and very smart and know exactly where not to go in conversations. And they're part therapists, but they also can pull from history of other families they've worked with. And then it's very hard for a family when they're talking about their situation in isolation, when someone says, no, I understand, I've seen this very similar, if not identical situation with 30 other families, and here are things that we tried to avoid, here are things that we did that worked really well. And then you begin to show, in a way, you're storytelling, but you're beginning to give the family structural advice about how to think through and work through these issues. And I can tell you there's a lot of strain between generations at times, and certainly between siblings. A lot of that shows up when a parent dies or both parents die, and you have these estate-related events. And it's a big reason why impact investing begins to change the dialogue with families. They're able to talk about their money as a way of saying, we have this money, not who's going to get it and spend it, but what are we going to do with this as a family together? How are we going to take this capital, and what do we really care about? And I think that in itself, it's the biggest driver of change, positive change that I've seen with families. And it's been a hugely important part of our business. But the short answer is you can't tell people they're wrong, and you have to really wade carefully through all these conversations.
All right, and we have time for one last question.
My question is in regards to your timeline. About every 5 years, you've went through starting a private business, mergers and acquisitions into now a public company. Where do you see yourself in 5 years from now?
Hopefully still employed. I would like to see this through, and I've brought a lot of people into this. All of my partners, investors, and it's a very heavy lift. And right now is at a point where, when I was talking about the hard cycle, we're in the hard cycle, and so I'm sort of reminding myself that I have to think this well as I'm saying it out loud. But I want to see the business to continue to scale. We want to be the preeminent sort of ultra high net worth family advisor where people aspire to be our client and to work with and invest alongside other families. And it's not just money, it's everything else that can be represented by that, and the ways in which we serve them and the outcomes. and the ways in which they invest back into society, the ways in which they invest into climate solutions. I mean, there are a lot of ways that are not just money and size and scale. It really is things that I want to be, and I already am, but I will be hope to be very proud of that go on 10, 20, 30 years and long past my role as CEO and maybe even past my life. That's 5 years, but I can only think in 5-year increments, but in this case, we listed to create a permanent organization, not to get rich. No one sold. We all rolled our equity into we just have publicly traded stock now, but we did it really to create a global listed business that was transparent, that big families could look and say, I know exactly how this company's doing, and I see the profile of the people they're serving, and then the quality of the people that we hopefully are able to retain to serve them over time.
Liberal arts has been under attack as a type of education.
I'm happy you asked me.
Do you like liberal arts?
I am so happy you asked that. I will, and I'd be really happy to. And everyone talking about STEM, like that's, and by the way, it's a great career path. It's a great educational structure. But I think this is one of the only and last points in your life, until you're retired, where you can study and move and learn and have different course material, different types of professors. And I just think this is the time in your life where you're supposed to be doing that. And I'm always shocked and kind of perplexed when an 18-year-old is like, I know what I'm going to do with my career. I'm like, I'm still figuring it out. I'm 53. I mean, I don't think you ever, I think you should be open, and I think this is an opportunity to learn. So I personally am a huge vocal defender of liberal arts. I do have to say, I think that pendulum is swinging back towards like realizing it is good, and I think all of you should be very proud that you're in the liberal arts and at Ohio Wesleyan, and I think you all should make sure that you really experiment, because the window closes and then you're in that first job, and then all of a sudden the channels do narrow. I think it's a fabulous educational structure, personally. And I will absolutely, my oldest daughter goes to Vassar College and studying psychology. And she absolutely is not following my footsteps. She really loves the course. I think she wants to be a therapist because she does so much work on her father. But anyway, thank you for asking that. And thank you all for listening. Sorry, hopefully I didn't bore you too much. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mike. All right, thank you so much for coming to the Milligan Leaders in Business Lecture. If you're a student, please make sure you sign in at the front tables. And Mike is available to answer a few more questions if anyone has any. I'm sure you do, and thank you so much for coming. Oh, also, please fill out the survey in your program tonight. All right, thank you.